Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here in collaboration with Chip Theory Games for yet another Gearloc guide. Today's Gearloc is Carcass. He is a professional chef, but maybe don't pay attention to what's in his food if you're vegan. He is one of the Gearlocs who was released alongside with the Unbreakable expansion, and his main thing is that he cooks the carcasses of baddies that are defeated during your adventure, and then makes them into something that can benefit you. I guess his name had to come from somewhere. So we have all of Carcass's stuff. We have his mat, his chip, his dice, his reference sheet, and also some recipe cards that I'm going to go over in detail so that you have a really good understanding of what they are and what they can do. And we're also going to give just a little bit of initial setup for Carcass. So here is his basic information up here in the top left, like always. We have his stats. We know that he's a melee fighter, and his innate ability is meat hooks. His innate +1 is called Captain Hooks. All right, so he starts with 2 dice that are on his mat, just to begin with. The first one is straight up meat hooks. So this die, you set it to 1, it's a counter. So this number is the number of dead baddies that Carcass can currently carry around on his meat hooks and then use in his skills. So it goes from 1 to 6, and you're going to want to increase the capacity of the meat hooks in order to collect more meat. So the other die he starts with is one that's going to help with that. He's got a spot here for a consumable that's called supplies. You set it to 0, and once the counter reaches 4, you have the option of discarding all 4 little points on the supply die in order to increase meat hooks by 1. So we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail throughout the video. So back to just straight up meat hooks. So again, meat hooks is a counter, and you have the opportunity to add a baddie to your meat hooks every time you defeat one in battle. So that's always an option when Carcass kills someone, is to put them on his meat hooks. And when that happens, you put the baddie in your prep area. So all of your baddies that are hanging out on the meat hooks go into the prep area, and then if you are over the number on your counter, you must immediately discard until you have the correct number of baddies. So if I wanted to put a second baddie here right now at 1, I would have to choose 1 and discard the other. The other thing that's interesting about Carcass is that he adds directly to his meat hooks when he kills a baddie himself. You also need to be keeping 2 stacks of defeated enemies when you are playing with Carcass. One is just the general stack of enemies that have been defeated throughout the course of the game. And you also need to keep a separate stack of baddies that have been defeated in a specific battle. And the reason that you do that is because Carcass has other abilities that let you pick up the corpses of baddies that have been killed in a specific battle and add those to his meat hooks. And there are a number of reasons you would want to do that. So Carcass gets his fuel, as it were, from killing baddies himself, and also at certain points from picking up baddies that have been defeated in this battle. So that's something that you want to make sure you're tracking as you play with Carcass. And again, you're going to want to increase the capacity of this die very soon. There are 2 ways to do it. One is to spend a training point. So at any point you have a training point, you can use it to tick this up. It goes all the way up to 6. And as I mentioned, if you get supplies up to 4 and discard down to 0 again, then those supplies go into an increased capacity on meat hooks. So there are 2 ways to increase the size of the meat hooks, which you'll then use to collect all of those baddies. So there are a number of reasons you're going to want to do that as Carcass. His skills very much center on the meat hooks and the baddies that are on the meat hooks. So that pretty much covers meat hooks, which is Carcass's innate ability. His innate +1 is called Captain Hooks, and that basically includes all the lovely benefits of meat hooks, plus something that's special. So once per battle, if he has Captain Hooks, the innate +1 ability, when Carcass uses his hook meat backup plan, which we'll get to, Carcass can instead deal a number of true damage that is equal to the difference between the value on his meat hooks die, so you want a good meat hooks capacity, and the current number of baddies that's actually on meat hooks. So you want to manipulate the number of baddies you're carrying versus the number of baddies that you could carry in order to use your innate +1. So the other thing I want to talk about for Carcass before just going through his dice is the fact that he is a cook. You need to set aside some special cards for him that come with him. Also, there's a lovely Cookin' with Carcass real recipe book that comes in this Gearloc. Enjoy. But his recipes are very special. So I want to talk about them now, and then I'm going to talk about how to get them when we go through the dice. Also, by the way, all of this information is on the back of Carcass's Gearloc reference sheet. So if you want to read along with me or check on things, this is the place to go. So Carcass's deck of recipe cards is tied to his chef profession. There's a profession on here called chef, and you are going to be rolling dice to see if you get to learn some of these beautiful recipes. But the actual cooking that Carcass does is mostly done during the recovery phase, unless you get some very special die rolls. So I want to talk about what that looks like, and then how to get the recipes as part of your die rolls. So during the recovery phase, if Carcass has learned recipes, he can cook any number of recipes that he has learned using baddies from his meat hooks. So to do that, he puts a learned recipe in his loot area, and then he places a baddie from meat hooks on it to create a dish. So what that means is that when you are setting him up on a larger table, you're going to keep the recipe deck separate. You're going to have one section for recipes that you've learned, so you can look at your little recipe book. And then when you're ready to cook your recipes, you cook them and you put them with your loot. And that helps you keep everything straight. And the other thing you should keep straight is that Carcass cannot trade his food loot. He has to keep it for himself after he cooks it. There's also gross food, which is not gotten in the same way as the recipes in the recipe deck. So keep it separate. And I'm going to talk to you about how to get it when we go through his dice. But this is a different little recipe. Disgusting, but useful. So really quick, I just want to look at these recipe cards with you so you can see what they do, so you can see why you might wish to cook them during recovery. So as you can see, each of these recipes leaves you a little bit of room for what kind of baddie might be in here. So this one is a pan-seared something. It could be anything delicious off the mat, with one exception, which we'll talk about. But you can heal yourself when you eat this food for the number of HP that's equal to the cooked baddie's HP stat, and you get a +1 if the baddie is an orc. You can make a troll brew battered baddie. Say that 5 times fast. And this one lets you choose a Gearloc to have the skill Thick Skin with a certain number on it until the end of the battle, where the number is equal to the number of preferred targets the cooked baddie has. Stewed allows you to create a delicious baddie stew, where you just keep stacking baddies here. And when you put a 4th one down, you get to discard all of them and immediately increase your HP stat die by 1. Stew on that. You get Honey Glazed, which lets you choose any Gearloc's initiative die at the start of any battle, and then move it up the number of initiative spots equal to the initiative of the cooked baddie. You can make a Caramelized baddie, which lets you move any baddie up to a number of positions on the battle mat, where the number is equal to the initiative stat of the cooked baddie. You've got Augot Crusted, which lets you remove all dice from any Gearloc's active slots, and then deal a number of true damage to any baddie, where the number is equal to the cooked baddie's attack stat. Pretty nice. And then Canned. You can either deal 2 damage to a non-adjacent unit, or reduce a poison effect die on yourself or an adjacent unit by a number equal to the defense stat of the cooked baddie. And you get a +1 on that if the baddie is a bog baddie. So these are the recipes we're going to be able to learn. And then you have Gross Food, which you have to keep drawing perpetually. It is gross. It lets you heal yourself for 2 HP, or you can place an attack die from the supply on any available adjacent position, and then the next unit, Gearloc or baddie, so be careful, to move onto that position takes 2 damage, and then the die is removed. So these are the recipes, and these, once again, when you cook them, they go into Carcass's loot area. Once you use them, the recipes go back to his learned recipes area for the rest of the game. So once he learns a recipe, he continues to know it. However, Gross Food, again, is not drawn as part of the recipe deck, so you have to draw it as a specific result on some of Carcass's skill dice, or by using his backup plan. So basically, once this one's used, it's returned to its spot next to the recipe deck, and you have to draw it again. So recipes, once learned, stay learned. Gross Food, you have to keep drawing, but there are more options for how to get it. You also might have noticed that there are certain benefits for cooking certain types of baddie. One thing you should know is that Carcass cannot cook mech-type baddies into dishes because they don't have any meat. However, even though you cannot cook them, mechs can still be very useful. You can still put them on your meat hooks because they can be used for any other skill that requires baddies from the meat hooks. And Carcass is a pretty creative dude. So let's go ahead and look at his profession dice and see just how creative he is. Once again, all the die faces are on the front of Carcass's Gearloc reference guide, so that is the place to go to follow along with me. His first profession die is also his innate die called Meat Hooks. As you know, this is what stores all those baddies, and you can increase it by spending supplies or training points. But meat hooks is also part of an entire profession that's called hunter that includes 2 other dice. So one of them, troll call, essentially lets you manipulate what baddies actually make it into battle in the first place. So let's have a look at troll call. As one would expect from Too Many Bones, troll call has a bones face on it, but then all the other sides are a whistle with a number on it that represents the baddie point number. So there are 2 sides that have a 1, 2 sides that have a 5, and 1 side that has a 20. So what troll call does is it lets you roll it at the start of battle. It doesn't cost you any dex. It's kind of outside of your usual roll and resolve turn. So at the start of battle, you roll it, and you can draw 3 or fewer baddies with this point number on them from the active stacks. You can replace a baddie of the same value and same type if it's 3 point on the battle mat with the one drawn. So basically this lets you replace baddies that are on the battle mat with others from the same stack that are more appealing to you. And then whichever baddies end up being unused go to the bottom of the active stack. So that is troll call. So one thing to remember again about troll call is that you can draw from different stacks. So if you get a 5, you can draw from the 5 stack, you can draw from the 1 stack, and replacing is optional. So make sure to use it to its max ability. The other die in this hunter profession is in fact called hunt, how thematic, and this one has some particularly interesting bones faces. So as expected, you have some bones faces, but these are reusable bones. So you can use this in your backup plan. It's not required. But then after use, you can place this bone back in its skill slot, which means that you do use it in your backup plan, but then instead of exhausting it after you spend it, it goes into your skill slot, which is pretty great. One of the sides is this little eyeball that stands for Scout. This is a locked die. So if you roll this result and put it in a lock slot, then after the recovery phase, you can scout the area. So this basically lets Carcass look for baddie types that he might want for his meat hooks, but it also lets him do extra stuff in recovery, because normally you have to choose scouting from among other activities. That is not true in the case of the scout die ability, because you can use it after the recovery phase to do an extra scout. Then you have this lovely meat cleaver. This is also a locked die, and it stands for collect. So after the recovery phase, you can spin this from your lock slots and add the top 1 point baddie from the active stacks to your meat hooks. So it's just a way to pick up an extra little free baddie. Went scavenging, found something delicious. And then it has a final side called Search Party, and this is an immediate or a lock die. So if you use it immediately, you roll it and you increase supplies by 1. Or you can lock it, and then later when you're preparing the baddie queue, you can increase or decrease the baddie points by 1. So if you want to have a nice round number that prevents maybe an extra baddie from coming onto the mat, then this is helpful for you. And that is hunt. So Carcass has got some interesting things going on in his hunter profession, but that is nothing on the deliciousness in store on the chef profession. So the first die in this profession is called Culinary Studies. You need it before you can get anything else. So let's go ahead and talk about Culinary Studies, because even on the road, you could do remote study, you could do field work. That's what Carcass is up to. So as one might expect, Culinary Studies does have 1 bones face, but it also has faces that allow you to get recipes to start with. So 3 of the faces on this die have this very suspicious looking soup, gruel, whatever it is. This is the symbol for gross food. And when you roll this die result, it allows you to draw the gross food card, put it in your recipe area, and then cook it later during recovery. So tasty, so good. The other thing you might roll is this lovely set of silverware. This stands for menu. And this allows you to discard a baddie from your meat hooks to do one of the following things. So you can draw gross food. So if you really wanted that gross food and you didn't roll the gross food face, you could draw it from getting this face. You can also choose to switch this die to its bones side and add it to your backup plan. Or you can learn the top card from the recipe deck. So if you want to pick up a recipe, this is how you do it. You roll dice during battle that lets you learn recipes to use later in recovery. And that is the amazing Culinary Studies die. Next, you can graduate to being an executive chef. Thrilling. Of course, you're going to start off with a bones face, but executive chef also has more sides that are geared towards getting you new recipes. So there is 1 die face that allows you to draw the gross food card, but all of the other faces are the menu side, the silverware side that allows you to learn the top card of the recipe deck. So you want to roll this a lot if you're trying to learn all the recipes. There's also one side that has a special symbol at the bottom right. It's like a little person reading. And so what that one means is that instead of just taking the top recipe off the deck, then you can instead learn one of the top 2 cards from the recipe deck. So you keep one in your learned recipes area, and then you put the other card on the bottom of the deck. So this one's really trying to expand your cooking repertoire. It may be baddies that you're cooking, but they could still taste good, right? So that is executive chef. And then we have fast food, because what does an executive chef do? They make fast food. Perfect. So again, there is a bones face, but then all the other sides are going to be this little image of a burger with either a 1 or a 2 printed in the top right corner. And these stand for fast food. So what fast food does is normally you can only cook your learned recipes during recovery. So you have to wait until after you learn them in battle to cook them later during a different phase of the game. However, fast food allows you to cook up to the number of learned recipes on the die immediately right there in the middle of battle and then add them to your loot. And that means that you could, of course, use them right away as well. So fast food lets you get to your recipes faster. And if you recall, some of those were pretty beneficial, so maybe you want them very quickly. That's what fast food is for. Way to cap off the chef profession. Next, we have a lovely profession called taxidermist, and it's not gross at all because its skills are called skin, stuff, simulate, and study. Yikes. So you might have noticed there's arrows kind of going everywhere on here. You can start with skin or you can start with study, but then study can lead to stuff and stimulate, and skin could also lead you to stuff and stimulate. So it's really up to you what order you want to do them in, but you have to do study or skin first and separately from each other. So let's go ahead and have a look at skin, because nothing says fancy travel more than having the amazing fur of a baddie on. So of course it's too many bones. You're gonna get some bones, a nice little double bones face in the skin, which I think is thematically extra appropriate here because, skin and bones. But let's get to the more exciting side, shall we? First, you have 2 sides that are gonna have this lovely warm pelt on them. So what they let you do is discard a baddie from meat hooks, and then you gain buff HP equal to half of that baddie's HP stat rounded down. So let's say that this lovely bridge troll was on our meat hooks. We could use warm pelt, discard this baddie, and then get 2 buff HP because his HP stat is 4. Very exciting stuff. We also have sharp pelt, which also lets you discard a baddie from the meat hooks. Actually, let's just put our little bridge troll over here to talk about it. And so this one allows you to discard a baddie from meat hooks, roll attack dice equal to its attack stat, so only 1 here, and then deal the roll damage to your target. So basically you can try to do a little bit of extra damage to your target by turning one of his dead friends into a pelt that you poke him with. And then you have the thick pelt, and this also lets you discard a baddie from meat hooks. You gotta have baddies to fuel these amazing abilities. Carry them on your meat hooks. So you add defense that's equal to the discarded baddie's defense stat to your active slot. So you just get a free defense here for this particular baddie. So I find that hilarious. And this is just one of the many creative ways that Carcass can use the corpses of baddies aside from cooking them. So remember, you can't cook a mech, but you can do all of this stuff with a mech, for example. So that is skin. So charming. Let's go ahead to simulate next, since we'll just follow the order on the little sheet. So when you get up close to the simulate die, you're going to see different sides representing different baddie types. So we've got goblins, beasts, scales, trolls, bog, and orc. And you don't roll this die. Instead, what you do is you discard a baddie chip from your meat hooks, and then you set this die in a lock slot on a face that matches the baddie type of the baddie that you discarded from the meat hooks. And it's going to give you like a 1-turn status effect that is good. So you can put this in your lock slot or in another Gearloc's slot, and the die will exhaust at the end of the Gearloc's next turn. But while they have the die, the Gearloc has a skill bump. So they get a secrete for bogs, they get compound for scales, they get lashback 1 for being a beast, they get mischief 1 for goblin, rage 3 for orcs, and thick skin 2 for trolls. So basically these are all related to the baddie types. And it's as though Carcass has used his intimate knowledge of these baddies and their anatomy, and he's tasted all of them and all of that in order to simulate some of their abilities. It's cooking, it's science, it's food science. So that is simulate. Next, we have one of my personal favorites, which is called stuff. So let's have a look at the stuffing die. As usual, you are going to have a bones face on here. But you're also going to have a few different die faces that have like a little deer head. This is the Taxidermy Profession, and they're going to have the values 3, 4, or 5 in the top right corner. And basically what taxidermy does is it lets you create a dummy out of the dead body of a baddie that you have killed, and then you use it as a decoy to distract other baddies that are still alive on the mat. So basically this encourages them to come and beat the corpse, the stuffed corpse of their dead friend. So you can take a baddie again from meat hooks to power this, and you place that baddie on any available position on the battle mat with the number of HP that is printed on this die. And then the baddies will treat this as an opposing unit, and it does not take turns or use skills. You just kind of put like a little baddie piñata up there, and all the other baddies come and beat it to death. Again. So that is the joyous skill of stuff. And then you get study, which is cool, but not nearly as fun as stuffing the corpses of dead baddies. So again, you have a nice little 2 bones face. There's actually 2 of those on here. And then the rest of the faces are going to be these little faces that have like a study icon. And what you do is if you roll the study icon, you place this die in a lock slot, and then you place a baddie from meat hooks above it. Then each baddie with a magic baddie type has its initiative stat reduced by 1, and that lasts the entire adventure for as long as this is in your lock slot. So it's basically like because you know this type of baddie better because you're studying it, you can get the jump on them, and their initiative is always reduced by 1 because you just understand them a little bit better, so they can't be quite as fast or surprising as they used to be. I should clarify that the initiative does not change immediately, so the current initiative meter for the battle does not change. However, this will start to take effect at the beginning of the next battle. So that is study. And then we have the lovely Survivalist Profession. So we have Shelter, which leads to Hunger Strike, and Scavenge, which leads to Battlefield Improvisation. And we sure are doing a lot of that as Carcass. So let's go ahead and start with Shelter. This die has no bones faces on it. It just has a little picture of a tent. And basically what you do is you discard a baddie from meat hooks, and you gain buff HP that you can distribute between party members as you see fit. And the buff HP is equal to either the baddie's defense stat or its attack stat. And if you happen to roll a +1 side, then it's whatever that stat is, +1. So if we were trying to get some buff HP off of this bridge troll, on a normal die face, we'd only get 1 because either his attack or defense stat. But on the plus side, we would get 2, that 1 + 1. So that is Shelter. Gimme Shelter. Our next die is Hunger Strike. So I'm actually going to go not in the order on the actual Gearloc reference sheet, but following the arrows because I just feel like that's more intuitive. So we're going to go from Shelter to Hunger Strike, which is die 15. And there is a bones face on here, but all the other sides are little stomachs with a 1 or a 2. And what these mean is that you can deal damage to your target that's equal to this number, so at least 1 or 2 if it's a 2 side, plus the difference between your HP stat and your current HP. So basically, if you have a very high HP and you're missing several hit points right now because you've been hit a couple times, that is when this die is the most powerful, because it's always the base value that's on the die face, but then the difference between the HP you could have and the HP you currently have. So it's smart to get some high HP and let yourself get banged up a bit if you're intending to use this die. So for example, if Carcass has a health stat of, let's say it's 6, we've been putting some points into it, but he's currently at only 2 health, that means that if he uses Hunger Strike, he'll get 1 damage just for the die, if this is the die face we rolled, plus the difference between his current health, 2, and his max health, which is 6, for 4 health. So it'll do 4 + 1 damage for a total of 5 damage to the target. So that is Hunger Strike. Next, we have the lovely Scavenge, which is one of the other starter abilities alongside Shelter, and it has a very nice little bones face. And then every other side is a dagger with a number. So the number is always going to be either 1 or 2 up there in the top right corner. And Scavenge is either an immediate use or a lock die. So you can immediately discard a baddie from the meat hooks to do one of the following. You can increase your supplies by 1. So remember, you increase your supplies and then discard them to increase your meat hooks ability, as well as one other thing, which we'll get to. You can draw the number of loot on this die while you are adjacent to a 5-point or higher baddie. Or you can draw the number of loot that's printed on this die during the recovery phase. So that's why you would lock it. So you can do that later during recovery. Or you can lock this and then wait until you're adjacent to a 5-point baddie before using it from your lock slot. So that is Scavenge. It lets you discard a baddie from your meat hooks to basically draw some extra loot cards, as long as other conditions are right. And then this last die is called Battlefield Improvisation. So how do you improv? Let's find out. You will, of course, have some bones faces, but then you're going to have some other faces with a little card and then an F, an L, a T, or even one of each. And so if you've played Too Many Bones for a long time, or if you've been reading the rulebook, you're going to recognize these. These are symbols from the back of the Trove Loot cards that you have to lockpick in order to get to the Trove Loot that's inside. But Carcass uses them in a different way. So here is a lovely example Trove Loot card, so I can show you what I mean. So basically every Trove Loot card has 3 little levels of lockpicking you have to get through: lever, trip, and force. L, T, F. And what Carcass does with his improvisation is he refers to the top card of the Trove Loot deck and then the number on the lock of the corresponding value. So if it's LTF, it could be any of them. Let's say it's T, then we're going to look at the trip value. So then you take that number and you can either add that number to the total damage applied to your target, or you can add that number in defense to your active slots, and then you discard the top Trove Loot card. So basically what this die does is it allows you to turn a Trove Loot card into something other than the Trove Loot. It lets you turn it into an immediate in-round stat boost instead. So then you do have to discard the top Trove Loot card if you do that, so you don't get the loot. But you're using this die with the corresponding values on the back to bump yourself in the moment. And that is Battlefield Improvisation. Whose loot is it anyway? So now it's time to talk about the consumable dice that Carcass has. We've talked about supplies a bit. We're going to get to it. First, we're going to talk about the lovely Carcass Own die. What a lovely consumable. So it's got a couple of blank faces, but basically what happens is when you acquire this die, you set the counter to 3. You don't roll it. You just set it to 3. Then you decrease it by 1 on your turn to add the top 5-point baddie from the active stacks to meat hooks. So it's like just a way to pick up some more baddies without having to actually defeat them in battle. You can just grab them off the stack. And then once you run out of this die, you of course acquire it again, set it to 3 again, and tick it down while trying to get some tasty baddies to cook tonight. So that's Carcass Own. So nice. And then you also again have supplies. So let's take a closer look at it. So again, supplies has 1 blank side, and then it goes from 0 up to 4. So you add your supplies in a couple of different ways. We've encountered a die that does it, and we'll have a nice look at our backup plan. But essentially, when you have supplies, on your turn, you can either decrease supplies by 4 to increase the capacity on your meat hooks by 1, which is a very good idea. Or you can decrease supplies by 2 to discard a baddie from meat hooks and then replace it with the top baddie from the next highest active stack. So for example, if you discard a 5-point baddie, the next highest stack is the 20 stack. So you could actually get a nice chunky 20-point baddie to put on your meat hooks if you discard those precious supplies. So you go from 1 to 5 to 20. So supplies is a super important and useful die. It increases meat hooks, and it also increases the value of what you can put on the meat hooks. All right, so those are all of Carcass's dice. Let's go ahead and discuss his backup plan. So for 1 bone, he can do something called Body Harvest, which lets him add a 3-point or less baddie from the current battle's defeated stack to his meat hooks. So this is the reason that you keep aside baddies that were defeated during this battle. Carcass can automatically add baddies that he defeats to his meat hooks, but if he wants to add other defeated baddies from this battle, then he needs to use Body Harvest and pull them from the current defeated stack. So that is what Body Harvest is good for. For 2 bones, Carcass can hook meat, and this lets him deal 1 true damage to any baddie. However, you might have remembered that Captain Hooks, once he has that innate ability, allows him a different option for hook meat. Instead, Carcass can choose to deal the number of true damage that's equal to the difference between the value of his meat hooks die and the current number of baddies on his meat hooks. So Captain Hooks can let you do big damage if you have a large meat hooks capacity and not a lot of meat on the hooks. For 3 bones, Carcass can do an ability called Battle Rations. This allows him to draw the gross food recipe if he doesn't already have it, and then immediately cook it using a baddie from meat hooks. So if you want that quick HP boost, that gross food will do. For 4 bones, he can do Roadkill Search, and this lets him add the top 5-point baddie from the active stacks to the meat hooks. So just get a nice little 5-point baddie on there. Tasty. And then you have the Grim Meter. It lets you add as many baddies as you would like, up to your max, from the current battle's defeated stack to your meat hooks. So you can just, stock up the pantry, put everything in a little meat freezer, and cook it during recovery. And of course, for 6 bones, you can upgrade it to innate +1. So those are the basics of our buddy Carcass. As usual, he does have a beginner build strat. So it's recommended that you throw a point or two into defense and HP early on. If you increase Carcass's HP, it's going to have the added benefit of making Hunger Strike stronger in the late game. And then for skills, if you like to cook, and who wouldn't, invest in Carcass's chef profession early. The more control over recipes you have, the more success you will have. Then it's also recommended that you check out the Survivalist line, because Scavenge and Shelter are pretty good for early game life maintenance. And then get Hunger Strike, because that one's very cool. Don't forget to add a meat hook or two along the way. So that is Carcass. Hopefully this video hooked you and is going to make you want to try playing him next time you sit down for a game of Too Many Bones. I know that with him, you'll be able to cook up something good. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back ASAP with another Gearloc guide. And most of all, happy gaming.